The Mafia boss thought his enemies were gone, until the black waitress warned, "They found you." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The night was quiet at Morello's, a high-end restaurant where elegance filled every corner, from the polished marble floors to the glimmering chandeliers that hung above. The soft hum of conversation mingled with the clinking of wine glasses, and everything seemed just as it should, peaceful, controlled, and serene. At table 7, Mafia boss Dominic Romano sat with a group of high-profile guests. His sharp features were calm, unreadable, a man whose presence alone demanded respect. Despite the chatter around him, his piercing eyes never left the room. His gaze scanned the crowd with the precision of a predator, always alert, always aware. He had built his empire on control, on eliminating threats before they ever reached him. And tonight, he was confident that his enemies were no longer a concern. After all, they had been dealt with. Or so he thought. Emma, the black waitress, moved quietly between the tables, her uniform spotless, her demeanor calm but attentive. She had learned to be invisible, blending into the background of a world that never fully saw her. Yet tonight, something was different. There was a tension in the air, a subtle but undeniable shift that Emma couldn't ignore. As she approached table 7, she noticed something unusual. Dominic Romano's eyes were fixed on her. It wasn't the casual glance of a diner taking in the staff. No, it was something deeper, something more calculating. She felt his gaze like a weight on her shoulders, but she didn't falter. She poured the wine into his glass with practiced grace, her hands steady despite the tightness in her chest. As she moved to leave, she heard a whisper, barely audible, but enough to send a shiver down her spine. "They found you." The words didn't come from anyone at the table, but they echoed through her mind with a clarity that made her blood run cold. For a moment, Emma's heart skipped a beat. She stopped, her instincts screaming at her to turn and look. But she didn't, not yet. She continued her duties, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched, being hunted. She didn't know who was watching or who had spoken, but something inside her knew. The enemies Dominic thought were gone, weren't. Her mind raced as she moved between the tables, delivering plates, refilling glasses. Every part of her wanted to run, to warn him, but the words stuck in her throat. She had no business getting involved in the affairs of a man like Dominic Romano. But the warning was clear, and she could feel it. Something bad was coming. As she approached the back of the room, her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice, Dominic's voice, calm, yet commanding. "Wait." She froze. Slowly, she turned around to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. His eyes held hers, an unreadable expression on his face. "What did you hear?" he asked, his tone almost too casual, as if he already knew the answer. Emma felt her throat tighten. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, her mind screamed at her to say something, anything. The room seemed to close in around her, the weight of his gaze pressing down on her. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "Tell me what you know." The air between them thickened with unspoken tension. Emma took a breath, trying to steady herself, and then spoke, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I heard someone say, 'They found you.'" The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Dominic's face remained impassive, but his jaw tightened ever so slightly. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, something Emma couldn't quite read. Was it fear? Or just calculation? "Who said it?" he asked, his voice steady but sharp. "I don't know," she whispered. "I just heard it. But I think," she hesitated. She wasn't sure what to think anymore. "I think they're coming." As the night stretched on, the ambience of the restaurant remained as immaculate as ever, with soft murmurs of conversations blending into the symphony of clinking glasses and the faint hum of classical music. Dominic Romano sat back in his chair, his dark eyes still focused on Emma, the black waitress who had just warned him of something he had never expected to hear. "They found you." The words still echoed in his mind, their meaning not yet fully sinking in. He had made his life in the shadows, in control of everything around him, from the businesses he ran to the people who worked for him. No one dared cross him, not without facing the consequences. But now, this waitress, a seemingly insignificant part of his world, had thrown a wrench into his carefully controlled existence. What did she know? Who had spoken those words to her? And why did he feel a strange chill creep up his spine as he stared at her? Emma, on the other hand, stood frozen, her heart pounding as she met his gaze. She hadn't expected this. She had only wanted to warn him, to do the right thing. But now, the weight of his scrutiny felt like 1,000 pounds pressing down on her. She opened her mouth to say something, but her words caught in her throat. The air around them seemed to thicken, and every sound in the room became muffled, as if they were in their own world. You need to tell me more. Dominic's voice was low, almost dangerous. There was no warmth in it, only a cold edge that made Emma feel even smaller. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the floor before meeting his once more. I don't know who said it, she stammered. I just overheard them. It was in the back, outside the kitchen. I think they were talking about you, and then... She paused, unsure whether to continue, but the look in his eyes pushed her to speak. I think they're coming. They haven't given up. Dominic's expression remained unchanged, but a slight twitch in his jaw betrayed the anger simmering just below the surface. He had spent years building his empire, eliminating threats before they could even materialize. How could something like this slip past him? How had his enemies managed to stay hidden for so long? His mind raced with questions, his thoughts calculating, sifting through possibilities. Stay here, he said, his voice sharp and authoritative. Emma didn't move, still standing in front of him, unsure of what to do next. The weight of his words hung in the air, demanding her compliance without explanation. She watched as Dominic stood up, his tall figure towering over her. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the private area of the restaurant where his security detail was stationed. The calm, composed exterior he always maintained seemed to crack for just a moment. As he walked, Emma could hear the tension in his footsteps. Dominic wasn't the type of man to show weakness, but something had shaken him. And that something, she realized, was her. She had no idea who was coming for him, or why they had targeted him, but now, she was involved. She couldn't back out. She had warned him, and in doing so, had somehow become a part of his world. A world she had no business being in. As she stood there, she thought back to the moment when she had first entered the restaurant months ago, just another woman looking for a job, trying to make ends meet. She never imagined that the path she had chosen would lead her here, to this moment. She never imagined that a simple warning would put her at the center of a storm that could destroy everything. She tried to calm herself, to steady her breathing. But the fear of the unknown was a heavy weight on her chest. Would she be safe now that she had spoken out? Would Dominic's men protect her, or would they see her as a threat? The door to the private area opened, and Dominic reappeared, his expression unreadable. Behind him, a couple of his most trusted men followed closely. He walked back to her, his eyes never leaving hers. Get your things, he said, his tone no longer demanding but rather flat, as if he were stating a fact. You're coming with me. Emma's heart raced, but she didn't ask questions. She knew better than to do so. There was no point in questioning him. He was the Mafia boss. She was just a waitress, a small part of his world, but now she was being pulled into something much bigger. With shaky hands, she nodded and turned toward the back of the restaurant to grab her coat. What had she just gotten herself into? And more importantly, what would happen next? As Emma walked through the back hallway of Morello's, her heart pounded in her chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. The gravity of the situation was beginning to sink in. She had never imagined that something as simple as a warning would pull her into this dark, dangerous world. The heavy oak door leading to the staff entrance closed behind her with a soft thud, and she paused for a moment to collect herself. She could hear Dominic's voice from the other room, commanding his men in hushed tones. His usual confident, almost regal demeanor had shifted, replaced by a sense of urgency that even his powerful presence couldn't mask. Emma had never seen him like this before. He was always in control, always calculating, always 2 steps ahead. But tonight, something was different. She wasn't sure what it was, but the tension was palpable. She glanced around the back room, her mind racing. She needed to get her things and leave the restaurant. She couldn't stay here any longer. This was not her world, and she was in over her head. But as she grabbed her coat from the back room, Something inside her held her back. She had warned him. She had done her part. Now, there was no going back. As she emerged from the staff area, she saw Dominic standing by the door, his back to her as he spoke with two of his men. His voice was low, but the authority in it was undeniable. He had always been a figure of power, someone who could command respect with a mere glance. But now, Emma could see the flicker of concern in his posture, the way his fingers drummed lightly on the surface of the table as he spoke. It was subtle, but it was there. He wasn't as invincible as he seemed. As she walked closer, Dominic turned around and looked at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was a fire in his eyes. "Let's go," he said, his voice firm. "We don't have time to waste." Emma nodded, her throat tight. She had no idea where this was leading, but she wasn't about to question him. Not now. Not when everything had already spiraled this far out of control. The car was waiting outside, the engine running. Dominic didn't speak as they got in. The driver, a large, silent man, nodded briefly at Dominic before pulling away from the curb. The streets of the city passed by in a blur, the bright lights of the city, offering no comfort in the growing darkness around them. Emma sat in the back, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Why had she gotten involved? Why had she warned him? She wasn't a hero. She was just a waitress, trying to survive. But something about Dominic's presence, something about the way he had looked at her in the restaurant, made her feel like she had to do something. She couldn't just sit by and watch him fall. The car took a sharp turn, and Emma was jolted back in her seat. Dominic's eyes were fixed ahead, his jaw clenched in concentration. "You said you overheard something," he said, his voice still calm, but with an edge to it. "What else did you hear?" Emma swallowed hard, the memory of those words still fresh in her mind. "I heard them talking about you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They said they found you. They've been looking for you, Dominic." Dominic didn't flinch, didn't react at all, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tightened around the armrest. "Who?" he asked, his tone sharper now. "Who's after me?" "I don't know," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't catch their names, but they sounded like they were in charge, like they had power." Dominic's eyes flicked to her for a brief moment, assessing her words. "And you didn't tell anyone else?" he asked, his voice hardening. "No one else knows about this." Emma shook her head, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. "I just overheard it," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I didn't think it was real. I thought it was just talk. But then I heard the words again. They said they found you." Dominic's jaw tightened, and for the first time since Emma had met him, she saw a flash of something raw in his eyes. It was a mix of anger, frustration, and something else, something more dangerous. "You should have come to me sooner," he said, his voice low. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into." Emma opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She had only done what she thought was right. But now, she realized that the consequences of her actions were much more complicated than she had imagined. The car continued its journey through the darkened streets, the silence between them thick and heavy. The city outside seemed to fade into the background as Emma and Dominic were enveloped in the tension of the moment. They were heading into unknown territory, and neither of them knew what awaited them. But one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The car screeched to a halt in front of a large, imposing building. Dominic didn't speak as the doors opened, and his security team immediately surrounded the vehicle, scanning the area with practiced efficiency. Emma's heart was racing, her pulse echoing in her ears. The tension that had been building for hours now hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She had no idea what was about to happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She was in deeper than she had ever been before. The door to the car opened, and Dominic stepped out first, his tall frame casting a shadow over the city lights. His security detail moved swiftly around them, their eyes constantly shifting, scanning for any sign of danger. Emma hesitated for a moment, unsure of what her role was now. She had warned him, but what did that really mean? Was she part of this now? Was she just a pawn in his game? She didn't know, but as she stepped out of the car and joined him on the cold pavement, she felt an unshakable sense of uncertainty. Dominic's eyes flicked to her for a brief moment, as if assessing her, and then he began to walk toward the entrance of the building. Emma followed, trying to steady her breathing, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread in her chest. The doors to the building were massive, heavy iron with intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story of power and dominance. As they entered, Emma's eyes immediately adjusted to the low light. The interior was lavish, decorated with expensive art and furniture that screamed wealth and authority. There was no mistaking it. This was Dominic's world, a world of control, danger, and high stakes. The moment they stepped inside, a tall, sharply dressed man approached them, his eyes scanning both Dominic and Emma with a cool, calculating gaze. "Everything is secure, boss," the man said, his voice respectful but firm. Dominic nodded curtly, his face unreadable. "Good. Keep your eyes open. They've been looking for me. I don't want any surprises." The man nodded again, his expression serious. "Understood. We've got eyes everywhere." Dominic turned to Emma, his voice low, almost casual, but there was an edge to it. "Stay close. This is where things get real." Emma nodded, though her heart was in her throat. She wasn't sure what he meant by that, but the way he said it sent a chill down her spine. They walked deeper into the building, passing through what looked like a security checkpoint. The men stationed there didn't even glance at her, their focus entirely on Dominic, their loyalty unquestionable. Emma felt out of place in this world, but she wasn't going to back down now. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her. As they entered the heart of the building, a large, open space filled with people, Emma saw the scale of Dominic's operation. There were men and women everywhere, talking in hushed tones, making deals, and exchanging information. Some of them were sharply dressed, others less so, but all of them had one thing in common. They all seemed to recognize Dominic as a force to be reckoned with. Dominic stopped at the center of the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. The chatter around them slowly faded, and a hush fell over the crowd. "We have a problem." Dominic's voice was calm, but carried an authority that silenced everyone. "Someone thinks they can come after me. They've been watching us, and they think they can take what's mine." There was a moment of silence. Then a low murmur spread through the room. Emma's heart raced as she looked around, seeing the faces of people who seemed to know exactly what was happening. They were all waiting for Dominic's next move. He was in control, and everyone around him knew it. "But they don't know what I've built," Dominic continued, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "They don't understand the power I have, and they won't take anything from me. Not while I'm still breathing." The words were heavy with threat, and Emma could feel the weight of them in her bones. She had no doubt that Dominic meant every word. He wasn't the type of man to back down. He wasn't the type of man who would let anyone take what was his. "Get ready," Dominic said to his security detail, his eyes narrowing. "We're going to make sure they know exactly who they're dealing with." Emma watched as the room seemed to spring into action, men and women moving swiftly, gathering information, preparing for whatever was coming next. Dominic turned to her then, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You stay with me," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're involved now, and I'm not letting you go." Emma nodded, her mind racing. She didn't know what she had gotten herself into, but she couldn't back out now. There was no turning back. Dominic was a man of his word, and now she was part of his world, whether she liked it or not. As the hours ticked by, the tension in the building grew thicker, a palpable force that pressed against every surface. Dominic's men had gone to work, each one executing their tasks with precision, like well-oiled machines. Emma stood off to the side, watching as everything unfolded around her. She had never imagined she would be part of something like this. This wasn't a life she had chosen, but now she was deep in it. The sharp, commanding voice of Dominic echoed through the hall as he gave instructions to his men. He was everywhere, his presence a constant reminder of the power he held. Despite the chaos, there was something unnerving about the way he carried himself. Calm, collected, and in control, even as the world around him seemed to shift. Emma, on the other hand, felt like she was slowly being consumed by the whirlwind of activity around her. She had never been part of an operation like this. She had always kept to the background, staying invisible, moving through life without drawing attention. But now, there was no hiding. Dominic had made it clear, she was involved. "We've got eyes everywhere," one of Dominic's men said as he approached. The man's voice was low, but there was a sense of urgency in it. "The word's out. They know we're here." Dominic's jaw tightened as he absorbed the information. "Then we make sure they know we're not afraid," he said, his voice cold and steely. He turned to Emma, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You stay with me. No matter what happens, you stay close." Emma nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't fully understand what was going on, but one thing was clear: Dominic was taking this seriously. The stakes were higher than she had imagined. The enemy, whoever they were, wasn't going to stop just because Dominic had warned them off. No, they were coming, and they weren't going to back down easily. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hall as more of Dominic's men moved into position. Emma watched as they took their places, preparing for whatever was to come. The building had become a fortress, each entry point guarded, every exit monitored. But despite all the precautions, there was a sense of inevitability in the air. They were ready, but so were their enemies. "We're not just dealing with anyone here," Dominic said, his voice low but steady. "This is bigger than I thought. They've been watching us for months. We've got to be smarter." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emma didn't know what was at stake, but she knew that Dominic wasn't the type of man to make idle threats. He was a master at playing the game, and if he was worried, then the situation was far more serious than she had originally believed. She watched as Dominic moved through the room, his eyes scanning every corner, every face. He was always 2 steps ahead, always in control. But as he walked past her, his eyes flicked to her for a brief moment, and in that instant, she saw something in his gaze. It wasn't just power or calculation. There was something deeper, something that made her heart race. It was fear. It was barely noticeable, but Emma saw it. For a man like Dominic, fear was a dangerous thing. And yet, it was there. The tension in the room thickened as Dominic gave the order to lock down the building. Emma could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the way everyone moved with a renewed sense of urgency. They were preparing for something, but what? She had no idea, but she knew it was coming. Dominic's men spread out, securing every exit, every hallway, every possible point of entry. It was like a military operation, only there was no enemy in sight, yet. Emma stood by Dominic, her mind racing. She had no idea what role she was supposed to play in this. Was she just another piece in his game, a pawn he could use to his advantage, or was there something more to it? As she watched him move, she felt a strange pull, something she couldn't quite explain. She had always kept her distance from people, never getting too close. But with Dominic, there was no escaping it. She was involved, whether she liked it or not. And the closer she got to him, the more she realized just how dangerous this life was. "Stay close," Dominic said again, his voice sharp and commanding. Emma nodded, her heart racing. She had no choice but to trust him. She had come this far, and now there was no turning back. As the minutes ticked by, the building became quieter, the tension more intense. They were waiting for something, but no one knew when or where it would come from. The enemy was out there, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when they did, Dominic would be ready. Emma only hoped she was too. The building was eerily silent, the kind of stillness that comes just before a storm. Dominic stood in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the walls, the windows, every corner of the space, as if expecting an attack from any direction. His presence was commanding, and the men around him moved with the precision of a well-trained army. Every move they made, every decision they took, was calculated. The tension was palpable, thick in the air, like a live wire ready to snap. Emma stood off to the side, her eyes shifting from Dominic to the security team, trying to make sense of everything that was happening. She had warned him, but the more she observed, the more she realized how deep this ran. This was no ordinary threat. This was something bigger. Dominic had known that, of course. He had always been ahead of the game, always in control. But now, even he seemed to feel the weight of the situation. There was something personal about this attack. It wasn't just a rival trying to take what was his, it was more than that. Dominic's eyes locked onto hers as if sensing her thoughts. For a moment, she could see the flicker of something beneath his usual cold exterior. Something vulnerable. It was fleeting, but it was there. "Stay close," he said again, his voice firm. His words left no room for argument. Emma nodded, even though she wasn't sure what it meant to stay close in a situation like this. She wasn't part of his world, not really. She had no business being here, but she was involved now, whether she liked it or not. Dominic turned, signaling for his men to take their positions. They had been preparing for this moment for hours, and Emma could see the calm efficiency in the way they moved. Each man knew his role, each woman, too. They weren't just a team. They were a family, bound by loyalty and the understanding that they lived in a world where survival depended on one thing: power. Power, and the ability to protect what was theirs. Dominic's eyes swept across the room again, this time with a sense of determination that Emma hadn't seen before. He was no longer just the Mafia boss. He was a man fighting for something far greater than himself. The silence lingered, broken only by the occasional click of a door closing or a hushed conversation between his men. The room was waiting, poised on the edge of something. Emma felt it too. She wasn't sure what it was: fear, adrenaline, anticipation, but it settled in her chest like a heavy weight. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, the thud of boots against the cold marble floors a sharp contrast to the otherwise quiet atmosphere. Dominic's men immediately tensed, their hands resting on the weapons at their sides. Emma's pulse quickened as she turned to face the door. Something was coming. The door opened, and two men entered, their faces unreadable, their steps confident. Dominic didn't flinch as they walked in, but Emma could see the subtle shift in his posture, the way his body tensed. "Report," he commanded, his voice still calm, but with an edge of urgency. One of the men stepped forward, handing Dominic a tablet. "They've made contact," the man said, his voice low. "The message is clear. They know we're here, and they want to make a move." Dominic's jaw tightened as he studied the tablet. Emma couldn't see the details, but she could sense the weight of the information. This wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a declaration of war. "They think they can take me down," Dominic muttered, his voice so cold it sent a shiver down Emma's spine. "They've been planning this for a while, but they don't know what they're up against." Emma stood still, watching as the room fell into a deeper silence. She could feel the tension crackling in the air, thick and heavy. Dominic wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for control, for his empire, and for everything he had built. The stakes were higher than ever. "Get everything in place," Dominic ordered, his voice firm. "We're not waiting any longer. They'll come for us, and when they do, we'll be ready." His men moved quickly, gathering their equipment and preparing for the inevitable. Dominic's eyes never left the tablet, his mind working, calculating the next steps. Emma couldn't help but wonder what it would take to survive this. She had seen the power Dominic wielded, but now, she was seeing something else, something more dangerous. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. She could feel it in the way Dominic's men moved, in the way his eyes darkened with determination. They weren't just protecting him, they were protecting everything he had built, and they would fight to the death to keep it. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of this, whether she liked it or not. And as the minutes ticked by, she understood one thing: there was no turning back. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Emma stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by the stillness of the building. She could hear the muffled sounds of Dominic's men preparing for the impending confrontation, but the world outside seemed to pause as if waiting for something to break the silence. Dominic had given the order. They were ready, but Emma could feel the pressure mounting. Every move felt calculated, every breath heavy with anticipation. The enemy wasn't just a faceless threat anymore. They were real, they were here, and they were coming for Dominic. She could feel it. Dominic stood at the center of the room, his presence commanding, but there was something in the air that made Emma uneasy. His usual confidence was intact, but something flickered in his eyes. Was it doubt? Was it fear? She couldn't tell. She had never seen him like this before. His eyes met hers, sharp and assessing. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and Emma felt a strange shift. It was as though, in that moment, they were connected by something deeper than just a fleeting glance. He was a man of power, a man who had built an empire, but now he was vulnerable. It was a vulnerability she had never imagined. "Are you ready?" Dominic's voice was low, steady, but there was an edge to it. He was asking, but Emma could feel the weight of the question, the unspoken message behind it. He wasn't just asking if she was prepared for what was coming. He was asking if she was willing to face the consequences of being part of his world. Emma swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt strange coming from her lips. Was she really ready? She had no idea what she was stepping into, but at that moment, there was no turning back. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, growing louder as they approached. Dominic's men had taken their positions, but Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she turned to face the door. It wasn't just the sound of footsteps that made her pulse quicken. It was the tension, the anticipation of what was about to happen. "They're here," one of Dominic's men said, his voice grim. The air in the room shifted, as if a switch had been flipped. Everything became sharp, every movement precise, every second stretching out like a wire about to snap. Dominic gave a brief nod, his eyes hardening. "Let them in," he ordered. The door to the room opened, and two men entered, their expressions cold, unreadable. They didn't have to say a word for Emma to know who they were. These were the people who had been watching them, waiting for their moment. The two men moved with the quiet confidence of those who knew they were in control. "I assume you've been expecting us," one of them said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. Dominic didn't flinch. "I've been expecting you," he replied, his tone matching the man's coolness. The tension between the two men was palpable, like a thick fog that had settled in the room. Emma could feel it in her chest, the weight of it pressing down on her, suffocating her. These were the people who had come for Dominic, the people who wanted to take everything from him. "We're here to make sure you understand your place, Dominic," the second man said, his tone laced with a thinly veiled threat. Dominic's eyes narrowed. "I understand my place," he said, his voice low, steady. "Do you understand yours?" The silence that followed was deafening. The two men didn't speak, but their eyes flicked to each other, assessing the situation. Dominic didn't break his gaze. He wasn't backing down, and Emma could feel it in the air, in the way his men moved behind him. This wasn't just a negotiation. This was a showdown. The two men exchanged another glance before one of them stepped forward, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You've made a lot of enemies, Dominic. A lot of powerful people. You've crossed the line, and now, it's time to pay the price." Dominic's expression remained unreadable. "I've crossed lines all my life. That's what got me to where I am." The man's smirk faltered, and for a moment, Emma could see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Dominic was in control. He wasn't backing down. The tension in the room thickened, like a storm on the horizon, waiting to burst. "Enough talk," the second man growled. "We're here to take you down." And then, without warning, the air in the room exploded. Shots rang out, deafening, echoing through the halls. Emma's heart stopped in her chest as she ducked behind the nearest table, her hands shaking. Dominic's men moved quickly, returning fire with precision. The chaos was swift, brutal, and intense. Dominic remained at the center, his focus sharp, his every move calculated. Emma's mind raced as she watched the scene unfold around her. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The fight for survival had begun. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. One of Dominic's men rushed toward her, grabbing her arm with a firm grip. "Come on, we have to move," he said, pulling her toward the exit. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to keep up, her mind still reeling from the gunfire. She had no idea where they were going or what was happening, but she followed, her instincts telling her to move, to survive. As they ran through the building, Emma could feel the heat of the moment, the danger that was closing in on them. The enemy was here, and Dominic was going to fight to the end to protect everything he had built. The sound of gunfire echoed through the hallways, louder now, a continuous barrage of chaos that rattled the walls and sent vibrations through the floor beneath Emma's feet. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she stumbled behind Dominic's security detail, trying to keep up, trying to process everything that was happening around her. The world had become a blur of motion, flashing lights, and muffled voices. Dominic was still in the center of the action, his presence unwavering, commanding the room with a level of control that Emma could barely comprehend. His voice rang out, cutting through the noise, giving commands to his men, coordinating their movements with precision. "Move forward," he ordered, his voice sharp and steady. "Don't let them gain ground." We pushed back. Emma's legs shook as she ran, her mind racing. She didn't know who was attacking or why, but it didn't matter. In this moment, survival was the only thing that mattered. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, the realization that she had become a part of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. Dominic had warned her. He had told her to stay close, to follow his lead. And now, as she found herself running through the building, the gunfire ringing in her ears, she understood the gravity of his words. The enemy wasn't just coming for him. They were coming for everything he had built, and they were willing to destroy anyone who stood in their way. The door at the end of the hallway exploded open, and Emma was forced to duck as a hail of bullets sprayed the air around her. One of Dominic's men went down, his body collapsing to the ground with a sickening thud. Emma's stomach churned, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She had to keep moving. She had to survive. She glanced back, just for a moment, to see Dominic's figure moving swiftly through the chaos, his face grim, his focus unshaken. His men were in position, pushing back against the attackers, but they were outnumbered. There was no denying it. They were fighting a losing battle. Dominic's eyes met hers for a fleeting second, and for the first time since this madness began, she saw something shift in his expression. There was no longer just determination in his eyes. There was something deeper, something darker. A promise, maybe, or a warning. But whatever it was, it made Emma's heart race even faster. Get to the safe room. Dominic's voice broke through her thoughts, sharp and commanding. Now, without thinking, Emma nodded, her body moving on its own as she followed his instructions. The safe room. The only place in the building that was secure, the only place where they would be safe. She had no idea how far it was, or how long it would take to get there, but she knew that every second counted. She couldn't afford to waste any time. Gunshots rang out, echoing in her ears, and Emma's heart skipped a beat as she reached the corner of the hallway. Another wave of attackers was closing in, their footsteps heavy and fast. She could hear their voices now, shouting commands, their laughter low and mocking. They were closing in, and Emma felt her chest tighten with fear. "Hurry," one of the security men shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the nearest door. Emma's pulse quickened as she ran, the sound of her feet slapping against the floor drowned out by the growing roar of the battle behind her. She could see the door ahead, the one that would lead them to safety, but it felt like it was miles away. Every step she took seemed to slow down, as if time itself was stretching and pulling her into the heart of the storm. She couldn't stop now. She couldn't let them catch her. Not after everything that had happened. The door was just ahead, and she was almost there. But then, just as she reached for the handle, a body slammed into her, knocking her to the ground with a force that took her breath away. She gasped for air, her vision spinning, and when she looked up, she saw the face of one of the attackers staring down at her, a twisted grin on his face. "You think you're safe?" he sneered, his voice cold and mocking. "You think he's going to save you?" Emma's heart raced as she tried to scramble back, but the man was too quick. He grabbed her by the arm, yanking her off the ground with terrifying strength. She could feel his grip tightening, the cold steel of a weapon pressing against her side. She struggled, panic rising in her chest. She couldn't let him get a hold of her. She couldn't let him take her. "Get your hands off her." Dominic's voice rang out from behind her, cutting through the chaos like a whip. Before she could react, the man was yanked away, his grip loosening as Dominic's men moved in, subduing the attacker with brutal efficiency. Emma collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, her heart still racing as she watched Dominic's figure appear in the doorway. He was a force to be reckoned with, a man who could move through chaos like it was nothing. But for a moment, Emma saw something else in his eyes. Something softer. Something that made her feel like she was more than just a bystander in this fight. He looked at her, and for a brief second, their eyes locked. There was no need for words. In that moment, she understood. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for her, too. As the door to the safe room closed behind them, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. They were safe, for now. But the battle wasn't over. And as Dominic turned to face her, his expression hardening once more, Emma knew that this was only the beginning. The safe room was a stark contrast to the chaos that raged outside. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind them, and the moment the latch clicked, the tension in the room seemed to ease, if only for a moment. Emma leaned against the cold concrete wall, trying to catch her breath, her heart still racing from the narrow escape. The silence was overwhelming, almost suffocating, after the deafening gunfire and screams. She could still hear the echo of footsteps, the sharp clicks of weapons, the tension that had enveloped the building minutes earlier. Dominic stood across from her, his eyes scanning the room, his expression unreadable. It was hard to believe that just moments ago, they had been in the middle of a firefight. Now, in this room, it felt as though everything had come to a screeching halt. He was calm, his posture unwavering, but Emma could see the strain in his jaw, the subtle clenching of his fists. He wasn't as unaffected as he appeared. He turned to her then, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, careful, as though he was measuring every word. Emma nodded, though she couldn't speak immediately. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her mind still trying to process everything that had just happened. She had never been so close to death before, never been so aware of the danger that could take her in an instant. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know if she was all right. How could she be? "You should sit," Dominic suggested, his voice gentle, a sharp contrast to the cold, commanding tone he had used moments earlier. He gestured to a chair near the wall, and Emma slowly moved toward it, sinking down into the seat. Her legs felt weak beneath her, the adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so drained. Dominic watched her for a moment, his gaze softening just a fraction before he turned away. He moved toward a table near the corner of the room, his movements quick, efficient, as though every second mattered. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We need to stay alert." Emma nodded, her mind still spinning. She had no idea what was coming next, but Dominic's words grounded her in the present. There was no time for rest, not yet. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Dominic didn't look at her immediately. He walked over to a desk in the corner of the room, pulling out a file and flipping through it. "Now, we prepare," he replied, his voice clipped. "We're going to fight back. But first, I need to know where they're coming from." Emma's eyes widened slightly as she processed his words. This wasn't over. It wasn't just a matter of hiding out in the safe room and waiting for things to blow over. Dominic wasn't that kind of man. He would face this head-on, no matter the cost. "You've made your enemies," he continued, his eyes scanning the papers in front of him. "And now they want to take everything. I won't let that happen. Not without a fight." The determination in his voice was unmistakable. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. Emma swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. She hadn't signed up for this. She had only wanted to warn him, to help in whatever small way she could. But now, she was more deeply entangled in his world than ever before. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic paused, his eyes flicking to hers for a moment before he spoke. "You're part of this now," he said simply. "I won't leave you behind." Emma wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. She wasn't sure what role she played in all of this. She was just a waitress, a small piece in a much larger game. But Dominic's words had a weight to them. He wasn't treating her like a bystander anymore. She had been pulled into his world, and there was no turning back. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steadier this time. Dominic looked at her, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "Now, we take action. We find out who's behind this, and we take the fight to them. They think they've caught us off guard, but we're going to show them how wrong they are." He moved to a small communication station in the corner of the room, tapping a few keys on the keyboard. "I've got eyes everywhere," he muttered. "I'll find out who's pulling the strings. We need to be ready for the next move." Emma watched him, her heart still pounding, but now, a sense of resolve began to settle within her. She didn't know how this would end, but one thing was clear. Dominic wasn't the type of man to surrender. He would fight until the end. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she was ready to stand by his side. She didn't know what was coming next, but she knew that whatever it was, she wasn't alone. She had made a choice, and now, she would face whatever came with him. The minutes seemed to crawl by as the world outside the safe room continued to spin out of control. Dominic stood by the communication station, his face illuminated by the glow of several screens that displayed live feeds and security footage. His eyes were sharp, focused, his mind already a few steps ahead of whatever was about to come. Emma sat across the room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she watched him, the weight of everything still pressing heavily on her chest. She had never been involved in anything like this before, and yet, here she was, caught in the middle of a violent, dangerous game. The room felt small, the air thick with anticipation, As Dominic continued to monitor the screens, his face set in a mask of determination. Emma had never seen him like this, calm, but radiating an intense energy that made it impossible to look away. He wasn't just the Mafia boss anymore. He was a man with something to protect, and that made him dangerous. "They've been tracking us," he muttered, his voice low but clear. "But they don't know the full extent of what we've built." Emma nodded, though she wasn't sure if she fully understood what he meant. What had Dominic built that was worth fighting for? She knew the empire he controlled, but now she was beginning to realize there was more to him than just the surface-level power. There was a reason he had earned the loyalty of so many people. There was a reason they were willing to die for him. "We're going to hit them where it hurts," Dominic continued, tapping away at the keyboard. "I have eyes on all of their operations. It's only a matter of time before we catch them." The tension in the room thickened, the silence broken only by the quiet clicking of keys as Dominic worked. Emma wasn't sure what to do with herself, still trying to process the fact that she was caught in the crossfire. She had only come here to warn him, but now, she was part of his plan. She was part of this war. The thought made her stomach twist. But she couldn't leave. Not now. Dominic's eyes flicked up to meet hers for a brief moment, and she saw something in his gaze, something soft, almost unrecognizable. It was a flicker of vulnerability, of trust. "You're with me now," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "You don't have to worry about what happens next. I'll keep you safe." Emma didn't know why his words affected her the way they did. Maybe it was the way he said it, so matter-of-fact, as though his protection was the only thing that mattered. But in that moment, she realized that, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. She didn't have to carry the weight of everything on her own. Dominic had made it clear that he wasn't going to let anyone touch her, and she believed him. There was no question in her mind that he would do whatever it took to protect her. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. She had never relied on anyone before. But here, in this world, where survival was a game played by the most dangerous rules, Dominic was the only one who seemed to know how to win. "We've got a lead," Dominic said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. "One of their key players is trying to make a move. He thinks he's in control, but he's just another pawn in this game. And I'm going to take him off the board." Emma stood up, her legs trembling slightly as she moved toward him. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around her. Dominic didn't hesitate. "Stay close. Keep your eyes open. If you see anything at all, you tell me. We can't afford mistakes." Emma nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't know what was coming, but she was ready. She had to be. As the minutes ticked by, Dominic's men continued to prepare for the next move, and Emma felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This was no longer just about survival. This was about taking control, about striking first. The enemy thought they had the upper hand, but Dominic was about to flip the game on its head. And Emma was right there with him. She wasn't just standing on the sidelines anymore. She was in this fight, and she was going to see it through. Dominic turned back to the screens, his focus now locked on the mission ahead. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice unwavering. "We find them, we eliminate them, and we take back what's ours." The room went silent once again, the air thick with anticipation. Emma felt her pulse quicken as she watched Dominic, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. There was no turning back now. The game was on, and they were going to play to win. The air in the safe room was thick with tension. The countdown had begun, the clock ticking away the precious moments they had left. Dominic stood by the communication station, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he tracked every movement, every shift in the enemy's plan. His men had moved out, scattered across the building, each with a specific role, each one waiting for the word to act. Emma stood off to the side, her mind racing as she watched Dominic work. She had never seen him so focused, so determined. It was as if the world outside had dissolved, and there was nothing left but this moment. Nothing but the mission. He turned to her then, his sharp eyes meeting hers, and for a brief moment, the weight of everything seemed to settle between them. "Stay alert," he said, his voice calm, but there was an underlying intensity to it. "We're almost there." Emma nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't fully understand everything that was going on, but she knew one thing. Dominic had never been more serious. The room was silent for a moment, the only sound the clicking of keys as Dominic continued to track their enemies. Emma could feel the shift in the air, the sense of inevitability that hung over them. She had come to realize that there was no way out of this now. She had chosen to stand by Dominic's side, and no matter what happened next, she was in this fight with him. There was no turning back. The door to the safe room opened, and one of Dominic's men stepped in, his face grim. "They're closing in," he said, his voice low. Dominic's jaw tightened, but he didn't look up. "I know," he replied, his voice as calm as ever. "Prepare for the next phase." The man nodded and quickly exited, leaving Emma with her thoughts. The tension in the room was unbearable now. It felt as though the walls were closing in, the space shrinking around them. Dominic was still glued to the screen, his eyes scanning the information that appeared in front of him. He was calm, but Emma could see the flicker of something in his eyes. Something that spoke of years of fighting, of being on the edge of control. Something that made her realize just how high the stakes were. Dominic had been at the top of his game for so long. He had built an empire, one that commanded respect, one that people feared. But now, for the first time in a long while, his empire was under threat. And that threat was real. She could feel it, deep in her bones. "They're almost here," Dominic said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was a sharpness to it, an edge that told Emma that he was ready. Ready for whatever came next. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she could sense the shift in the air. It wasn't just a matter of surviving anymore. It was a matter of taking control, of striking first, and making sure the enemy knew who they were dealing with. Dominic turned to her, his eyes hard, his face set in a mask of determination. "You're with me now," he said, his voice firm. "No more hiding. No more running. This is where we stand." Emma met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. She wasn't just standing beside him anymore. She was standing with him. And that meant everything. "I'm with you," she said, her voice steady, the words coming more easily now. Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, just a flicker, before the familiar mask of control slid back into place. He turned away from her and walked to the door, opening it just a crack to check the hallway. "Time to move," he said. Emma followed him, her legs steady now as the adrenaline took over. They moved through the building with the precision of a well-oiled machine, the security team already in position, waiting for the signal. The halls were eerily quiet, the calm before the storm. The tension in the air was thick, like a live wire, waiting to snap. As they approached the central room, Dominic stopped, his eyes scanning the area. His men were already positioned, their guns at the ready. He turned to Emma, his expression unreadable. "Stay close," he said again, his voice low. "When we go in, there's no turning back. You understand?" Emma nodded, her hand tightening around the grip of the weapon Dominic had given her. She wasn't sure she was ready for what was coming, but she was ready to fight. For him. For herself. "Let's do this," Dominic said, his voice calm and steady, like the eye of the storm. He pushed the door open slowly, the team following behind him. The moment they stepped into the room, chaos erupted. Gunfire filled the air, the sound deafening as both sides exchanged shots. Dominic moved swiftly, his movements sharp and precise, his focus unshaken. Emma followed his lead, her heart racing, her focus narrowing as she fired at the attackers in front of her. The world around her felt like it was moving in slow motion, each action deliberate, each breath steady. This was it. This was the fight that would determine everything. Dominic's voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. "Push forward," he ordered. And they did. They pushed forward, taking control, moving as one, not letting the enemy get a single inch. As the seconds stretched into what felt like hours, Emma realized something. This was more than just survival. This was about dominance. About taking back what was rightfully theirs. And in this moment, as she fought alongside Dominic, she knew that there was no going back. This was where it all ended, or where it all began. The aftermath of the battle left the building in eerie silence, the chaos from moments ago replaced with the quiet hum of distant alarms and the heavy breathing of those who had survived. Dominic stood at the center of the room, his stance strong and unwavering, his expression unreadable as his men moved swiftly to secure the perimeter. Emma's heart was still racing, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breathing. The noise of the gunfire still echoed in her mind, and her body felt heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. She had never been so close to death before, Never had her life hung in the balance so starkly. But now, in the aftermath, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. It was far from over. She watched Dominic as he gave orders, his voice calm and efficient, as if he had already moved past the bloodshed and was already focused on what came next. He was a force to be reckoned with, a man who never showed weakness, a man who led with unrelenting strength. And now, in the midst of the aftermath, she saw just how much that strength had been tested. She had seen the fire in his eyes during the fight, the unshakable resolve that drove him to protect everything he had built. But now, as the danger had passed for the moment, there was something else there, something she couldn't quite place. It was vulnerability, and it was in the way his shoulders tensed as he scanned the room, the way his jaw tightened as he took in the damage around him. He was human, after all, and for the first time since Emma had met him, she saw that humanity. As Dominic turned to her, his gaze sharp and calculating, she realized that everything had changed in those few minutes of gunfire. "We're not done," he said, his voice low, but there was no mistaking the weight of the words. Emma's stomach dropped as she met his eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "This fight, this war, it's just beginning," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "We've pushed them back for now, but they'll come for us again. And next time, they won't be so easy to defeat." Emma nodded slowly, her heart sinking in her chest. She had known it wouldn't be over after the first round. But hearing the words come from Dominic's lips made it feel real. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease crawling up her spine. Dominic's expression hardened, and for a moment, he looked almost distant, lost in his thoughts. But then, he refocused, his eyes sharp and clear once more. "We find out who's behind this. We track them down, and we make sure they don't get another chance to attack." He turned to one of his men, his voice calm, but commanding. "I need everything on this. Names, locations, movements. I want to know where they are, where they're hiding." The man nodded, moving swiftly to comply with Dominic's orders. Dominic turned back to Emma, his gaze softening ever so slightly. "You're with me now? There's no turning back. You've seen what I'm capable of. And now, you're part of this. I don't take that lightly." Emma swallowed, her throat tight with the weight of his words. She wasn't sure how she had gotten to this point, how she had gone from being a waitress in a restaurant to standing here, in the midst of this world of danger and power. But there was no going back now. She had crossed a line, and Dominic had made it clear she was in this fight with him. "I'm with you," she said quietly, the words more resolute than she had ever imagined. Dominic nodded, his expression unreadable once more. "Good," he said simply. He turned toward the door, signaling for his men to gather. "We don't have much time. They'll be regrouping, and we need to be ready." Emma followed Dominic as he led the group through the building, the weight of the situation still hanging in the air. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down. She had made her choice, and now, she would stand by him, no matter what. The next few minutes felt like a blur, as they moved through the building, securing every entry point, checking every corner. It was clear that this was just the beginning of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. But as the minutes ticked by, Emma began to understand the magnitude of what they were up against. And though the fear still gnawed at her, she felt a strange sense of resolve. She wasn't alone in this fight. Not anymore. She was with Dominic, and they were going to fight together, no matter what came next. The room was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the equipment running around them. Emma stood beside Dominic, her breath steadying, her mind still reeling from the intensity of everything that had unfolded over the past few hours. The battle was over for now, but the weight of what was to come next lingered in the air. They had won this fight, but Dominic knew the war wasn't over. The enemy had been dealt a blow, but they would regroup. They always did. Dominic's focus had never wavered. His men had moved swiftly, securing every point of the building, making sure nothing could slip through their grasp. And as they stood there in the aftermath, Dominic was already thinking about the next step. "We've pushed them back," he said, his voice calm but edged with an intensity that matched the stillness of the room. "But this isn't the end. We'll hunt them down. We find the ones who tried to destroy what we've built." Emma didn't say anything for a moment, letting his words sink in. She had seen him as a man of control, a figure who commanded respect, but now, seeing him like this, she realized just how much he had to protect. His empire wasn't just about power or wealth. It was about survival. It was about fighting back when everyone was trying to take it all away. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Dominic turned to her, his eyes locking with hers. "Now we finish this," he said simply. "You stay close. I need you here." Emma felt a chill run through her as his words settled in. She wasn't just in the building anymore. She wasn't just a bystander to this world. She was part of it now, and she had a role to play. She wasn't sure exactly what that meant yet, but as Dominic's eyes held hers, she knew it would change everything. The moment stretched between them, charged with an unspoken understanding. She wasn't just standing by his side because of circumstances anymore. She was with him because she had chosen to be. Dominic wasn't a man who let people in easily, but somewhere along the way, she had crossed that line. And now, there was no going back. "What's next?" Emma asked, her voice a little quieter, a little softer. Dominic moved toward the table in the center of the room, picking up a file that was marked with a series of numbers. "We move on them," he replied, his tone sharp. "They've been planning this for too long. It's time we gave them a taste of what it means to mess with the wrong people." Emma nodded slowly. She wasn't sure what he meant exactly, but she trusted him. She had seen the way he operated, the way he commanded his team, the way he made the impossible seem like a mere inconvenience. Whatever he had planned next, she knew he wouldn't fail. Dominic turned back to her, his eyes studying her for a moment, as if searching for something. "You're ready for this, Emma," he said, his voice steady. "You've seen what it takes to survive here. You've seen the consequences of crossing us. And you know now that there's no room for hesitation." Emma's heart raced as she met his gaze, the gravity of his words hitting her all at once. She had never been part of anything like this. She had been thrown into a world of danger, violence, and power. But in Dominic's presence, she found herself feeling something she had never expected. She found herself feeling like she belonged. It was a strange thought, but it was true. She wasn't just a pawn. She wasn't a bystander. She was part of the fight now. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm, her hands steady. Dominic gave a slight nod, his lips curling into a small but approving smile. "Good," he replied. "We don't have time to waste." He turned toward the door, signaling for his men to follow. "Let's finish this." Emma followed him, her footsteps steady as she walked by his side. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She was in it now. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. And Dominic was going to make sure they didn't lose. Together, they moved toward the next phase of their plan, ready to take on whatever came next, ready to face the enemy head-on. This time, they wouldn't just survive, they would win. Experience the thrilling world of romance stories with a captivating journey filled with intense emotions, danger, and unexpected alliances. Follow the tale of a mafia boss who finds his world turned upside down when a seemingly ordinary waitress becomes entangled in his dangerous life. In these romance stories, trust is tested, alliances are forged, and a powerful connection emerges in the most unlikely of circumstances. As the tension rises and the stakes get higher, the bond between them grows stronger, revealing a deep and undeniable attraction amidst chaos and conflict. These romance stories are not just about love, but about survival, loyalty, and fighting for what matters most. With each twist and turn, the characters are forced to confront their pasts, their fears, and their desires, creating a narrative that's as unpredictable as it is passionate. If you love romance stories that blend thrilling action with heartfelt emotion, this is the perfect tale for you. Don't miss out on these intense romance stories that will keep you hooked until the very end, filled with moments of vulnerability, strength, and undeniable chemistry.